Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar dedicated to the connection between online and offline hate and anti-Semitism. This webinar is organized by FOA, Fighting Online Anti-Semitism. Fighting Online Anti-Semitism is a non-profit organization established to combat rising anti-Semitism and cyber hate. FOA is, to date, the only Israeli member of INAH, the International Network Against Cyber Hate. Since its establishment, FOA has trained more than 150 volunteers worldwide. Our volunteers monitor and report anti-Semitic content daily in various languages and across 7 social media platforms. When hateful content isn't taken down, FOA steps in, directly approaches the social platforms, and propels them to take action. Such involvement has led to an increase of over 100% in anti-Semitic content removal rate in the last 12 months. Our full reports are available on our website, both in English and in Hebrew, and I invite you to drop by and read them. In our next hour, our 3 experts will discuss the link between online hate and anti-Semitism and their offline manifestations. Our first panelist is Dr. Heidi Berich. Heidi is an expert on American and European extremism, including white supremacists, anti-Semitic, and anti-government movement. Before co-founding the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, Heidi led the Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project. The center is the premier organization tracking hate and anti-government movement in the United States. So, dear Heidi, would you like to start with your presentation?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Maya. I also want to just thank FOA for having me on today. So let me just pop up my slides real quick. Okay, hopefully that looks okay.
Perfect.
Great. Well, everyone, my name's Heidi Berich, and as Maya already said, I'm the co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. This is a relatively new nonprofit, started about 2 years ago now, since I left the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019. And we exist to take some of the techniques and strategies that myself and my other co-founder started at the Southern Poverty Law Center and expand them into other areas. And we are also a very proud member of the International Network Against Cyber Hate that one of our other panelists created some time ago. GPAHEs, what is going on? Got it. GPAHEs, this is our mission to strengthen and educate a diverse global community committed to exposing, countering racism, bigotry, and hatred, and to promote human rights values and create inclusive societies and democracies. We do work in the tech area against online hate, and we've done projects in multiple countries, Europe, the United States, but also places like India. We also work on things like voting rights in the United States and do a lot of journalism that exposes international white supremacist networks. One of our recent reports was about generation identity, which we were lucky enough to get deplatformed from Twitter as a result of that work. So I'd encourage you to check out our website. Today, I'm going to talk about just a little bit about the history of trying to fight online hate, and also what the link is between online hatred. I'll be focusing a lot on anti-Semitism, obviously, and real-world violence. I pulled this story off of the Southern Poverty Law Center's website because it was a reminder to me as to how long groups like the SPLC have been trying, others too, ADL, Enoch, obviously, trying to get the tech companies to understand the problem of online hatred. This was one of the earliest pieces I could find on SPLC's website. I think we wrote about this maybe even earlier than that. And really, in the early 2000s, it was a struggle to even get the companies to care about this issue at all, to even acknowledge it. And in fact, even those of us who were activists about these issues, I think hadn't really yet at that time conceived, although I have to give it to Enoch because they did, conceived of the fact that there should be pressure campaigns or something to get rid of this content. We just felt sort of at the mercy of the YouTubes and the Facebooks and so on. One of the most important things I worked on in the tech realm was really to stop the monetization of hate. People forget that in the early 2000s and really all the way up till 2017, some of the most extreme organizations, neo-Nazis, Klan groups, etc., were able to use everything that technology provided to them. They all had PayPal accounts. I remember going to a meeting with PayPal around the time that we wrote this piece in 2015 and saying, you have Klan groups, you have Nazis, you have all these people using PayPal, and the company just sort of was like, threw up their hands. It was of no interest to them to do anything about it. A real marker in the United States for shifting this sort of libertarian attitude of the tech companies came after the Charlottesville riots in 2017. In the week after that, where of course 4 people were killed, including an anti-racist activist, Heather Heyer, there was a shift in Silicon Valley, and they started deplatforming PayPal accounts, some Nazi white supremacist type material. It was a very small step for Silicon Valley in the direction of having some moral responsibility in these areas, but it was at least the beginning. And it's a fight that we're continuing to fight till today. I mean, people will remember that it took basically violence around the election here in the United States to take down anti-government militia accounts and racist groups like the Proud Boys. So it's an ongoing battle that FOA is engaged in terms of anti-Semitism in particular, and that Enoch deals with in a range of different forms of bigotry and hatred. I have this slide here because I wrote a piece for INSS there in Israel earlier this year, late last year. And the reason I have it up here is
I think we lost Heidi.
because the problem wasn't dealt with adequately. People were radicalized into extremist groups, extremist thinking. There's become an entire online ecosystem involving, millions of players who trade in anti-Semitism and all kinds of forms of hatred. And it's been a radical shift in the way our society works. And we can lay it at the feet of the internet largely. In the 1990s, before we had social media and these kinds of things, these movements were not out in the open, easily accessible. It was hard to find them. It was hard to read hate materials. It just wasn't there. But of course, the web has changed that, and social media has changed that for us forever. So the last year in particular has, because of the coronavirus crisis, the American election as well, but also extremism flourishing in many places, it has led to just a horrific situation when it comes to anti-Semitic content. You can see here that the annual report on anti-Semitism worldwide by Cantor at Tel Aviv University found an 18% rise in anti-Semitic incidents between 2020 and 2019. We had in the United States in 2020, far-right politicians in the US, in Europe, continuing to foster hatred against Jews. So we have levels of anti-Semitism that have probably just not been seen in recent decades. And I want to point out this part about politicians. It's important, especially with the disclosures this past week, that Facebook had a long list of people involving far-right politicians and other people who put out extremist views that are not held to their community standards. And this is a particular problem. I mean, it's not good when any person trades in this kind of hatred or bigotry online. But of course, it's people with huge followings, influencers, political leaders. when they trade in these ideas, that's how the stuff spreads really, really quickly. And so Facebook really should be ashamed of itself to allow the situation to exist. There's another thing that's been pushing anti-Semitism further in the last couple of years, something that started in the United States and spread into Europe, which is what's called the QAnon conspiracy theory. This is an insane idea that, you know, Democrats and certain actors are involved in child trafficking scandals. And over time, this started in 2016, it has become more and more of an anti-Semitic movement. You know, it claims that Jews are behind all these nefarious things, including the failure of Trump to win the election here in November 2020. So it's added another layer of anti-Semitism to the extremist world that didn't exist before. And QAnon is not a small thing, although it's frankly insane sounding. There are literally millions of adherents, not just in the US, but as far away as from where I am as Japan, who have been indoctrinated into this particular conspiracy theory. So here's some more data about the seriousness of anti-Semitism here in the United States. These are anti-Semitic incidents that have been documented by the Anti-Defamation League. You can see that the numbers started to fall around 2012, 13, 14, 15, but there's been basically a steady rise ever since in this problem. Also, the data for hate crimes that the Federal Bureau of Investigation puts out every year in the United States, this year showed that we've hit a 12-year high in hate crimes in the United States, and that the number of offenses is higher than it ever has been. And, you know, although the two populations that were hit the hardest were the Black population in the United States and the Asian population. That is largely because of COVID conspiracies and blaming Asians for the virus. If you take a look at the data and think about in terms of the size of the population, the Jewish population in the United States, and you think about it in those terms, you realize that these kinds of crimes, anti-Semitic crimes, are quite serious because the Jewish population is relatively small compared to those other populations. And we've had some just terrible, terrible attacks on individual Jews in various states, but also on Jewish institutions. So it's been quite tragic, and I'm sure most people here will remember the horrific attack at the Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue in 2018. And then, of course, another attack at a synagogue in Poway, California. So it's a very bad situation in the United States. So what do we know about the connection between the online world and the offline world? What is the connection between rising hate crimes and the kind of data that I just showed you and what is spread on the web and read widely? Well, there is some research out there that shows that there's a direct connection between hateful material that appears online and attacks in the real world. This is a story about research done at the University of Warwick in England, in which they compared, in this case, Donald Trump's anti-Muslim tweets, which he was quite prolific about, and then when hate crimes would occur. What is the correlation? Is there a correlation is the question they asked. And the answer was there was quite a correlation, actually. This shows when anti-Muslim hate crimes happened in the dotted line, the blue dotted line. And the other line is when Trump would tweet something anti-Muslim. And you can see that there's a reasonable correlation between those two things and spikes in violence around the time that Trump would put this kind of material out. It's not a perfect correlation, but the statistics showed that Trump did drive real world anti-Muslim hate crimes. And we can take from that evidence that there are probably links as well between politicians who trade in various forms of hatred and bigotry and violence that we see in the real world, or from the spread of, you know, anti-Semitism among QAnon adherents and real world violence. And I would argue that one explainer for rising hate crimes in this country and our hate crimes data has to do with the proliferation of hate content online. The research that looked at Trump and anti-Muslim tweets, they also looked at the Alternative for Germany, the anti-Muslim, anti-refugee, anti-immigrant political party in Germany, and how their Facebook posts were, in this case, Facebook, the last case it was Trump and Twitter, were related to anti-refugee attacks in Germany. And once again, there was found to be a direct link between social media content and then subsequent violent attacks on immigrant groups. So this, for me, this is definitive. We know that social media drives real world violence. And so if we don't get a handle on extremist material online, we can expect to see more hate crimes, more terrorism, etc. This is another study that was done a few years ago that looked into some of these real world effects. And it's very interesting in the sense that they looked at racial hate crimes in the United States from 2001 to 2008 and found a relationship between broadband availability. In other words, if people were more likely to have access to the internet, and these were still relatively early days, in those places you found more basically anti-Black hate crimes. I have to say that there isn't, unfortunately, there isn't enough research being done on this connection. And I know in the United States that the Department of Justice is looking to fund some more research along this line. We need to know more about the connection between online hate and real world violence. But I think at this point, we have enough indications to know that if social media does not clean up its act, then marginalized populations in particular are going to pay the price. So with that, I will leave it. And thank you so much for letting me talk about this important issue.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Very interesting facts, unfortunate facts, but I think the connection is very clear. Our second panelist is Dr. Abby Korb. Abby is a certified anti-terrorist specialist, internet specialist, and open source intelligence operations specialist. Abby developed one of the first internet training programs specifically tailored to the policing community in Canada. She also taught internet research skills, including investigative analysis of the dark web to government officials, intelligence, and members of the law enforcement communities across the world. And I'll just run your presentation.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you so much to FOA for putting this together. It's such an important topic. And to Heidi and Suzette, it's an absolute honor to be sitting on a panel with the two of you. And it's wonderful to be here. So let's get started. I'm going to talk to you today about intelligence, white supremacists, and the internet. Something that I have been involved with since way back. I think the three of us are dinosaurs in this field. We're old and experienced. So, and it's so nice that we could smile about that. I think I've grown with the internet and with hate as far as this goes. Can we go to the next slide, or the next one after slide 3, please? So there is a lot of information for proactive community-based organizations and law enforcement to garner from white supremacist websites. It gives them an idea of who is operating in a specific area. It gives law enforcement and intelligence agency the ability to geofence activity using crime markers, which is something that I've worked on in the past few years. Dropping a geofence and knowing what's going on in that particular part of the world specifically. Monitoring online white supremacist activity allows us to understand how groups operate, who the players are, how they recruit, and gives us a sense of intergroup relations, sentiment, radicalization, and targets. Shortly after September 11th, for example, the Aryan nations gave praise to those who perpetrated the acts. So we get a sense of interconnectivity. We can also understand the symbology. It's really important, especially in the real world versus the online environment, to understand symbols. And from studying the sites, we can get an idea of the symbols being used. For example, when law enforcement conduct an investigation surrounding a hate crime, they need to know what was said, what was the individual wearing, what signs, symbols did you see surrounding that. So for law enforcement in particular, and again, for community-based proactive organizations, studying these sites gives them those answers or can aid them or direct them to the answers. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you today about Donna. Donna was a persona that we created when I worked at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And we did that in 1995. The reason why she was created was so that we weren't just talking about the internet and talking about things that are going on. We were actually participating so that we can understand, fully understand how things went and what, sorry about that. So Donna started on IRC, and for those of you people who aren't aged, IRC is synchronous conferencing. So it's like a bulletin board system where I post something and you respond, not like chatting the way we have it now, where we're used to things nowadays. In 1995, Donna was elected online as president of the Nazi Party of Canada, which was quite an accomplishment, considering I'm a 5-foot-tall Jewish girl. My parents were so proud of me, I'll tell you that much. And she was also an active member on Stormfront, Stormfront being the first major white supremacist bulletin board site out there. Next slide, please. So this was Donna on Stormfront, and she was on and off quite often. So in this particular instance, she was saying, you know, hey, let's meet up, that type of thing. Next slide, please. So throughout the investigation and throughout this intelligence probe, especially way back when, Donna, when I left the Simon Wiesenthal Center, I was taken away by some law enforcement agencies to work with them. There were a total of 15 services involved. And there was some connectivity with the FBI and other agencies. This was shortly after September 11th. So here's a posting about a get-together. By following this information, law enforcement were able to know about meetings, upcoming meetings, and things like that, that Donna became privy to. Next slide, please. Next one, please. So I became known as Danger Girl because I really pushed the limits of the internet. And when I say push the limits, I sincerely mean it. After Donna's life story ends, I personally was given death threats for my activities, as well. The target, who you'll meet in a moment, of the investigation threatened me and Mark Zuckerberg simultaneously on the same post and same page. So I became infamous for pushing the limits. I infiltrated the neo-Nazi movement in Canada, was able to provide intelligence agencies, both federal and municipal, with information. I became engaged, married, and died and remembered on Facebook. which was amazing. Next slide, please. This investigation involved numerous people. There were law enforcement involved in Canada and the States. I had my colleagues at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I think Rick is here. Hi, Rick, if you are. He portrayed my good friend, Bonnie. And let's begin. So this is Donna. The picture was an Italian porn star. And we followed the same guy that I started with at the Simon Wiesenthal Center when I was on IRC. When I was working with law enforcement, he was a target of interest for many law enforcement agencies. That's him in the picture below Donna. At this point, we were courting and we were engaged. He constantly deferred to me for advice. So he would tell me things that he was planning. And although he wasn't a big fish, he was very well connected. Next slide, please. This is him. Isn't he a handsome guy? So this is him, thinking of me and loving me. And in the meantime, sharing membership lists with us. He was kicked off of Facebook numerous times for his activities, and shared, his ideas and plans, plotting. Next slide, please. This is Bonnie. Bonnie was my friend, my best friend. The story goes that Donna was a mess, an absolute mess. She left a rural area of Ontario and moved down to the States to be with her friend Bonnie, who was very well grounded. Bonnie, incidentally, was a man with the Wiesenthal Center. And we had a backstory. We had a complete backstory, but this investigation was one that was used as a model for future and ongoing investigations. During the time of the study, which, as I mentioned, was several years long, we were able to provide intelligence to law enforcement to prevent a Hells Angels massacre in Ottawa, our capital, as well as an outlaw biker attack that took place. But the police were able to be proactive from the intelligence garnered from this investigation. Next slide, please. So we were able to get membership to understand the international connectivity, the cross-pollination of groups through this investigation. And as an insider, we were privy to activities, actions, membership. This project took up thousands and thousands of hours over a span of years and years and years. It got to a point, next slide, please, where Donna had to kill herself. She had to kill herself because this was getting too deep, too involved. It was taking up some days 16 hours a day, if not more. And it was emotionally draining, to be honest with you. But what we did was, before I fake killed myself, was we created supplementary people to stay in touch and keep the study going. So this is Donna when this is her suicide page. And if you'll notice some of the mention here, He says he's getting his name tattooed on his chest, which he did. The second that the ashes of my fake persona were sprinkled on the fake beach in California, he got her name tattooed in Nordic runes on his chest, which I think we can see on the next slide, please. Oh, maybe the next one after. So sorry. Yes. So he had Donna tattooed on his chest in Nordic runes after the suicide and death and sprinkling of ashes. And then we get into our next persona, Ariana McDonald, who we created and had, again, a complete backstory. She was a friend of Donna's. She became involved with Kevin, but on a more casual level, which enabled us to keep this going. As you know, Jews in Canada number about 300,000 plus, a very low number. These groups present a clear and present danger. Right-wing groups have been on the radar of the Canadian intelligence organizations like CSIS, other federal groups, police, etc. A recent study said that there are over 6,600 right-wing channels and websites across the world, of which Canadians are very active in. They're one of the more active groups. By embedding ourselves in this type of group, in these groups and with these people, it gives us the ability to have an upper edge on these people and to garner necessary intelligence to safeguard our communities. And I think I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. It's a fascinating test case, case study. Really, really interesting, and I'm sure it provided valuable intel for years and years and years. And
well, there were numerous arrests that came out of this investigation. Kevin Goudreau, the target, was arrested a number of times as the result of the intelligence gathered and the actions that he perpetrated. We were able to be, again, proactive in notifying police and the relevant agencies in order to get these arrests. And
amazing work. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Last but certainly not least, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our third panelist, Suzette Bronkhorst. Suzette is the founder of the Complaint Bureau for Discrimination on the Internet, the first of its kind in the world. At present, Suzette is the Secretary General of INAH, the International Network Against Cyber Hate. Suzette, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm just unmuting. They left the oldest dinosaur for last because we started this hotline for discrimination on the internet in 1996. So well before social media happened. And I'm saying this because with social media, now you can only address social media. And actually what we did is we traced people that that said things on the internet which was against Dutch law, and then mailed them directly, which was kind of nice because only the hardcores would not stop, but most of the people are not hardcore racist, they're just dumb. So we would stop them. Like, shall we tell your daddy that you're using his internet connection? So And in the beginning, we had a huge problem because people saw the internet as something like, yeah, well, whatever, you play games on it, don't you? Um, and especially with Americans, they really didn't see a connection. And also, don't forget, this was the time before social media, before Wi-Fi, before smartphones. So all you could do was you had to call in to make the hardware handshake to connect to the internet. I don't know if you remember that film about total nuclear war, where the guy had to put his phone horn on a modem to connect to the internet. Um, so also another interesting thing, our bureau existed from 1996 through 2012. And in all that time, anti-Semitism was number one in complaints. And there's only around 9/11 for a few months, hate against Muslims came above anti-Semitism. And the other occasion was around an example I'm going to talk about now. We have Theo van Gogh, a filmmaker in the Netherlands, and he got murdered by a Muslim extremist. And then we had saw our opportunity. We worked together closely with the Dutch, or with the Amsterdam anti-discrimination part of the police, and they came with a suggestion that we would monitor the internet for a weekend, and they would monitor incidents in real life. So what we did, because then, apart from IRC, which you really can compare to chat today, it only looks different. But also what you had was so-called news groups, which is in a way sort of what Twitter later on modeled themselves on. Only there you had no restriction on how long your story was. And you had to download a special program, and you would make a hashtag with any topic, and anybody could do it. And all providers would just pass it on. So there was no ownership, which made it complicated because it's who do you speak to? We had to one by one, trace these people and then take action. But anyway, so these news groups had different topics, about bunny rabbits or about diaper rash. And also in the Netherlands, we had a group called Multiculti, which was the hotbed of racists and extremists. So we monitored that group and a few others that were also always having a lot of racist, high level of racist postings. And the police then made screenshots of the things. And then the police went and checked out all the incidents that happened. And then we put them next to each other. And we found about 28 cases where you could directly link the in real life incident to what was said on the internet. And most of them were like, we have to go to this and this mosque, blah, blah, blah. And then the mosque was set on fire. And also there were some, around 10 or so, in where they were cheering it on when the incident happened. But before that that incident was in the news. And through this research, not only did we prove there was a connection, but also they could arrest people that did in real life things, because there was not a lot illegal on the internet at that time. So that was very nice and interesting, and it also helped us because our way of working was we would first, when we would get a complaint, we compare to Dutch law, And then if in our opinion it was against Dutch law, we would address the person to remove it or else. And the or else was, if we thought it serious enough, we would file a complaint. And then you go to the police station and tell them, yeah, I want to make a complaint. It's about this. And, hey, Ahmed, your cousin has an email, doesn't he? And they offered us victim services. And so they were like totally like, didn't know how to deal with it. And it helped them to see how you, on the other side, can also use it as a fantastic tool to see what is bubbling up, especially for neighborhood policing. It's very helpful if you can see, because a lot of neighborhoods in my case in Amsterdam, of course they have a neighborhood Facebook group or an app, and so you can see what is just under the surface. So now community police is into those groups and try to prevent shit from getting out of hand before it actually does. So all of a sudden, it became for law enforcement also an interesting tool in prevention, which is nice. But yeah, that is what happened. We did that investigation. And the other thing that stands out in my mind is 9/11. Oh yeah, we did this research in 2004, the same year Facebook started, but it wasn't a big thing. It was basically a dating app for the university. But 9/11, which I spent in South Africa at a World Conference Against Racism, that within hours, all these messages went up that the Jews didn't show up. That was amazing. And that is actually, I think, the first big event where internet played such a dominant role. It's like now with the corona, and of course the Jews, because it's always their turn, but also Asians. But 9/11, within 2 hours, all these rumors about Jews were going around. But anyway, this is, I think, I stayed within time, well within time. So there you go. Grandma tells all.
Thank you. Yes, perfect timing. So thank you, Suzette. Thank you, Heidi and Abby. And let's open the floor for some questions from our audience. Feel free to type your questions to the chat window, or if you want, just fire away. So maybe I'll start with the first question addressed to Heidi, but please feel free to interject, ladies. The question is, researching the connection between online and offline hate in general and anti-Semitism in particular. Can you maybe, or have you witnessed a connection between real life events and the spike in online hate that then triggered or brought about an offline hate, an incident? Is it something that you can localize to ongoing events or specific states rather than statements by politicians such as Trump?
Yeah, there's definitely a relationship between emotionally volatile events that people take advantage of online to spread hate, like elections, for example. There's a huge rise in sort of ugly online chatter right now in Germany, even though Germany has a very strict social media law because of the election that's happening. And you can almost always see a pattern of hate crime spiking around elections. In the US, this has happened repeatedly. You know, when Obama was elected, for example, there were extensive attacks on him as a Black person online, but there was also a rash of hate crimes around the election. And I think the other thing is, you know, when you have majorly impactful events like terrorist events, in the US case, whenever it's an Islamic extremist, I mean, Suzette already mentioned 9/11, for example, but you find that those kinds of events can then spur online chatter, which can lead to violence then against targeted groups. Oftentimes, if there are Islamic extremist attacks, Muslims pay for it in real world violence. But as I said when I was giving my presentation, I think there's just a whole lot more work that needs to be done around these issues to tease out exactly what direction this goes. India has been an interesting case study lately where there have been attacks by the leadership there on the Muslim population and Dalit populations, where you seem to have this cycle of increasing political rhetoric that spreads into the populace, that then spreads hate speech, that then leads to actual attacks in the streets, like happened with the New Delhi riots a year and a half ago. So yes, that is definitely the case, but I do think we need to know more.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Would anybody like to ask our experts? Do you have something more specific about Canada, the US, or the Netherlands? What would you say the most targeted?
Actually, Europe.
I stand corrected. Europe, you're right. Would you agree on the most targeted groups across Europe?
I guess that also depends on where you are. For instance, in large parts of Eastern Europe, the Roma are the biggest target. And it's really quite scary because the political situation is, well, iffy, to say the least. And so they actually, there's a lot of accusations against Roma, or that they steal, or that a girl got raped. And then the Roma get it. The whole village gets set on fire. And but the internet is just, yeah, the great motivator and spread of fake news. The fake news is the biggest difficulty. And now social media are a megaphone. Because before, as I said, we had to go after each individual. And it's also harder, except for the Nazi Central Stormfront. It was, you really had to go out and search. That's why we always worked on the basis of complaints, because I simply don't have enough eyes to look at it all. So that's why you have to try and involve people and showing them it's in their own interest, because it's somebody's turn always to keep a clean internet is important for everybody, because people don't tend to think in those terms until it's their turn. But when it's your turn, you're too late. So you have to convince as many as possible people that is in their own interest, because that works the best, to do something about it. We've also been trying to get, I think they call it media wisdom these days, which would suggest that TV and radio are the same as internet, to be part of the curriculum in schools. And like from 10 years old on, they have a smartphone at 10, so they need to be educated at 10. Because now people say, yeah, well, you're too late. The earlier, the better, since they use it. And especially if you're a young child, you don't have much experience. And for adults, it's difficult to distinguish between fake news and news. So education, 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 because if you want to make a clean internet, we missed that train. You know, so yeah, maybe that's a bit harsh.
That's a very good point. Critical skepticism is something that is addressed when it comes to online safety, maybe on a university level, if
Yeah.
students are lucky. But definitely, there's a need to address the topic earlier. Abby, I got a question for you from one of our audience member. Did Kevin ever find out that that Donna was a hoax? Like, did he ever regret the
A
tattoo?
catfish.
Yes, that turned into a real cluster. That's where the threats to myself and Mark Zuckerberg emanated from. When he found out, he threatened, it was actually on my daughter's birthday a couple of years ago. A prominent human rights lawyer contacted me early in the morning and said, "Have you checked your email?" And it was like 6:37 in the morning. So I ran to my computer and there were threats on Facebook and and also through Facebook Messenger. So after he found out that I was working with law enforcement, he tattooed a giant wolf's face across his chest to cover everything up. And where Donna was the barrel of a rifle. He told me that he was going to put bullets through my door. So needless to say, I was happy.
You were cautious after that.
Actually, I wasn't. I was happy because it showed that I was doing my job. I was being effective. But yeah, I've received threats from him, but he never knew about the other personas that just befriended him, and are friends with him to this day on various platforms.
That's so cute.
Yeah, it was a fun time.
Thank you so much, Abby. Any more questions? If not, I'll just wrap things up. I would like to thank our panelists for their interesting presentations, very insightful, and the discussion. In webinars such as today's, we in FOA aim to raise awareness of the phenomena of cyber hate, discuss relevant issues from various aspects, and explore ways to combat hate online. Our
Education, education, education.
Exactly. Our webinars are open to the general public and they are free of charge. Please do consider donating to our organization or volunteering with us. We can always use you as a volunteer. It is only with your support that we can continue our important work, and not only our important work, Enoch's important work, and Raf's important work, and everybody who's joining in this very, very important task of cleaning the internet. If you'd like to learn more about FOA's activities, please check out our website. I've posted some link in the chat box, not only for just our website, all the organizations that were presented today. Follow us on social media, follow them on social media. You're also welcome to sign up for our newsletter so you can get informed about future events, as well as our international volunteers training project starting this November. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, and I'll see you in our next event.